Hey guys, so the one I want to read right now is really messed up. So, trigger warning about violence, about domestic abuse, but needs to be talked about, right? My female 26 husband, male 29, told our son 4 to slap me. I was holding our son, and my husband and I were arguing a little. He was losing his patience, and I could see him getting angry. And then he said to our son, "Slap her since I can't." And my son did. He hit me in the face. My husband just chuckled and started to walk away. I told my son not to do that, and I put him down. And then I started to tear up. I don't know why, it just bothered me. A little later, my husband saw that I had been crying. He said, "Stop being dramatic, he didn't hurt you." And then he told me, "I'll give you something to cry about if you want to cry." I didn't really say anything to him, and I don't know what to say. I just told him I was sorry. He was being so cruel. I don't understand why. Am I just being sensitive? What should I do? That's abuse. That's violence in the household. And that's involving your child in that violence. There is no measure by which this person is going to be a good person to have in your child's life. Not only does he think his own behavior is acceptable, but he wishes for his son to model that behavior. That is not acceptable at all. I'll give you something to cry about is one of the worst threats imaginable. Not only am I threatening you with physical violence, but I'm gaslighting you into thinking that whatever you are upset about isn't something that is reasonable to be upset about. And gaslighting is when you make someone think that their own thoughts are wrong. Make them think they've been misled, or you make them think that they're crazy. So to say to you that you were being dramatic and that was not a reason to cry is gaslighting. To then threaten you and basically say, if you continue to cry, I will hurt you, is not acceptable at all. I understand that getting out of a relationship like this entails a lot. A lot. It's never easy to get out of a relationship in general, let alone a marriage where you have a child. And that's something I can't really even begin to understand. That's where the edge of my general knowledge and general advice has to stop, because I don't want to advise you to do something that could get you hurt. But you need to understand that every day that you remain around this person is a percentage chance that they will become violent toward you or your child. And that getting hurt becomes an inevitable thing. And not only will they hurt you, but again, they will hurt your child, inevitably. So the correct answer, obviously, is to get out. That's not going to be easy, and that's an entirely different discussion. One I encourage you to have with your friends and your family. I encourage you to try and set up a network where you can make an emergency escape from this scenario, and also to keep your child safe. There is a Reddit story about a man whose wife was being abusive toward him and was threatening their children if he were to call her on her abuse. So Reddit encouraged the man to file for divorce and leave his wife. When he told her he was leaving her, she killed both the children and stabbed herself in the neck. She survived. She is now in prison, And the man says that he doesn't regret leaving her, even though she took his children from him, literally. I can never see the future, and I don't know how violent your husband is capable of being, or a man like this is capable of being, or a person like this is capable of being. But I know that it is not going to be good for you to stay just because you're afraid of that. You have to act, if not for yourself, then for your children. It's kind of a really heavy subject, and it's something that we're not really taught about here in America. Particularly, very rarely is the concept of spousal violence ever mentioned outside of media, in which it gets a characterized picturization. So it's not something we're really prepared to deal with. It's almost like we're better prepared for finding drugs in our parents' house than for dealing with spousal violence, because at least we had DARE, and at least we had like terrible PSA commercials in the 90s that showed what to do if you found your mom's crack pipe. But we really don't have a framework of knowing how to handle the scenario. So if you start going to your friends and family and just dropping this in their lap, I can't imagine that they're going to be prepared to give you a useful answer at that moment. Only you know your own life. So in the end, only you can really settle on the strategy that you want to use. But again, that's not a reason to keep quiet about what's going on. If the safety of your children is called into question, sometimes really drastic measures are necessary. So, I hope that you find a way to get out of this scenario. I don't know who I'm speaking to here. I mean, obviously, I'm not speaking to the individual that wrote this. I doubt that they'll ever see my video. And I'm speaking to the rest of you who hear that story and think, that's crazy. I would never stay in a scenario like that. This person is being held hostage by their child, in a sense. This happens a lot. Research shows that after having children, abuse, how should I put this? Abuse is more likely to occur after having children, because the abuser thinks that the victim can't leave them. And that creates a power dynamic where they feel like they can get away with anything. So I take this kind of stuff very seriously, because even if physical violence isn't that bad, like your 4-year-old son slapped you, it doesn't say that you were crying because you were hurting physically. He didn't break your nose. He didn't drag you through the street by your hair. He didn't give you black eyes or break your tooth out. Nothing like that. But you, again, I don't know who I'm talking to, the viewer or the person who wrote this. But even though there wasn't really that much physical damage, we're still talking about an extremely emotionally traumatizing scenario where the physical only serves to enforce the mental trauma that is being dealt. So in this scenario, while you may not or they may not have been physically injured, there was a huge emotional trauma caused by the physical violence. And that's what I mean when I say that even when the violence isn't that bad, or if you're very strong and you can take it. And this is an issue that happens a lot with men, with women who are physically violent toward them when they argue. I've been in this scenario, and I dated a girl who, when we would argue, would slap me in the face. It didn't hurt. I mean, it hurt, but I wasn't injured. So, was there really anything wrong with that? Of course there is. I then am tiptoeing around not wanting to get in a fight when she's done something wrong because I'm scared that it's going to escalate to physical violence. So I go, well, it's just not worth it to argue about what we're going to have for dinner tonight if it's going to end with her fucking slapping me. So sometimes the physical violence really just creates a psychological barrier around the victim. And that can be poisonous in the long term, in a way that physical violence, sometimes some people become a victim to physical violence once and immediately get out of the relationship. However, they'll stay in a relationship with psychological violence, I guess, with a psychological abuser without noticing how abused that they've become. So when you have a scenario where the physical abuse is very, very mild, but serves to create a very large mental trauma, you have to still consider that as you might a very, very traumatizing physical experience, where it's an obvious sign to get out of the relationship. Everyone kind of knows if you're showing up with black eyes and saying, oh, I fell down the stairs, it's about time to get out of that relationship. But you're unsure here because you weren't hurt. No, it's still equally time to get out of this relationship. So, I felt like this was another interesting scenario that was worth discussing. So if you, as a viewer, are, in a scenario where someone is being physically or mentally violent toward you, I encourage you to seek help from friends and family. And if you don't have friends and family around, I know a lot of us don't. There are a lot of other resources you can look up online. I mean, I'm just gonna right now if you type spousal abuse help in Google, there's a lot of different resources that come up, and I don't really know if any of these are useful. I know I've had issues with public resources in the past not being very useful, but I really, really encourage you to try and find any resources that you can. Reach out to anyone who you can, but be very careful, because if your partner realizes that you are trying to get out of the scenario, generally they will tighten the clamps even harder. So you have to be very, very careful with this, and that's why I'm being very, very hesitant to actually offer advice when it comes to the abuse itself, because I just don't know how to handle that. But what I can tell you for certain is that this is abuse, and that you do need to find a way out of a scenario like this if you ever find yourself in one. So thank you guys very much. I hope you've learned anything from this. And if you need help finding resources, feel free to send me a message. I will put links to what resources I can find in the description below. And if those aren't helping, I'll keep finding more resources and sending them to anyone who needs them, because we're all in this together in a way. So, love you guys.